Hey everyone, so here are fever chapters 13 through 15 kind of overview questions or overview on the analysis questions. Now, I'm going to do this in class most likely on Tuesday or Wednesday whenever I have you for a longer bell, but this is for Monday in case you get to the questions or want to start the questions and just you want some help finding things. So in chapter 13, Maddie is desperate to find food and water for grandfather. That's just a statement, it's not a question yet. What does her refusal to give up suggest about the theme of perseverance? So just thinking here, like we have the word give up with the word perseverance, right? And you're refusing to do it. So there's your definition right there, right? I'm refusing to give up. So that's probably something to do with the definition of perseverance. But here I have the definition for you in case you want to use it. Now for context, right? She's searching for food until she finally collapses from heat stroke. At least that's what I inferred she did because she got dizzy. She started feeling really cold and she passed out and woke up after blacking out. I just figured that she overexerted herself. Now, notice what I did there to try to help me find the definition, right? I used the context clues. At the end of chapter 13, still in chapter 13 here, Maddie collapses. How does that, again, not a question, right? Just a statement letting you know where we are. And it's at the bottom of page 45. How does this event serve as the climax of her struggle to survive in the countryside? So we have a conflict in the countryside, and really, what is the main conflict of the countryside, right? Think about the conflict of this chapter. She is trying to survive, trying to find food and shelter. And then when does this conflict end? Whenever she's done trying to survive in the countryside, that's your climax. So think about that in context of this question. How does the event serve as the climax of her struggle to survive in the countryside? Right? In so few words, I gave you the answer there. And just understanding here, conflicts don't always have to end positively. Just because the conflict ended doesn't mean she won, doesn't mean anything good could have happened, because nothing good happens at the end. Well, I guess you can look at it as something good happening because she ends up in the hospital and it seems like things are on the mend when she does that. Okay, question 3 here. How does Mrs. Flagg's role in chapter 14? So we are now in chapter 14. Page 47 and 48 is where I found most of this. Provide a foil. Now, a foil, it might be a new word for you, but it's just somebody who is the opposite of, right? So how is she an opposite to Maddie's mother? How is she a contrast? How is she different from Maddie's mother? So how are their ways of caring for Maddie different? Okay. And I see the biggest contrast to Maddie's mother around the top of page 48. Before I knew it, I was lying down with a sheet tucked so tightly over me that I couldn't move. That will be enough of standing up, young miss, said Mrs. Flagg firmly. Now, there are other moments of her caring for her. It starts on page 47, goes all the way through page 48. Pretty much the entire time we see Mrs. Flagg in chapter 14. We see her caring for her. But how is this different from earlier interactions with Maddie's mother? How is Maddie's mother, right? How are they different? How does Maddie's mother treat her differently? How does Maddie's mother care for her differently? So again, in chapter 14, how does the author use Mrs. Flagg's dialogue and flirtatious tone with grandfather to lighten the mood of a very serious situation? So we're lightening the mood here. How does it lighten the mood? Explain this. Now, I think the most prominent one here is this. Now, look what we've done, Captain, Mrs. Flagg exclaimed. Here we are chatting like magpies, which to me is kind of chatting is a positive connotation. Magpies to me, I think of like cartoons. And your darling, positive word again. Granddaughter still so sick. Grandfather patted my head. Sleep well, child. Really positive words here, and there's other moments where she's very positive, right? So the question isn't about their flirting. It happens throughout the chapter. None more as prominent as this right here, but it's how does it lighten the mood? Okay. And I kind of, again, let you, like I said it, right? We got to start remembering these words, connotation, positive versus negative. Okay. In chapter 13, find 2 examples of imagery. Now, imagery, again, all 5 senses, sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell, the author uses to describe the mocking nature of the fruit and water Maddie's looking for. So I found page 44, touch with water. There's also sound, both middle of the page. And then I found page 45, touch again, fruit, middle of the page. Okay. Back to chapter 14. During Maddie's fever dreams in chapter 14, the point of view becomes blurry and confusing. Now, it never, to me, I didn't ever see it change to third person. That's what it makes me think here by this question that she asked. But how does this help the reader understand Maddie's medical condition? And so more so here, it does become blurry. And what I think becomes blurry isn't really necessarily the point of view. It's more like reality. Like, is she, are we in present time? Are we in a dream? What is going on? And that to me happens here. I'm not going to read all this, but I did find this long quote for you guys on page 46, which really kind of sums up where is Maddie as far as reality. Now, I hate when authors do this. I hate when I'm reading something and the author doesn't tell me that they've switched to a dream state or they've switched to a hallucination, and I'm left to infer that that's what we're doing. It always confuses me. So that's why I especially wanted to copy and paste this for you here. This to me was all a dream or a hallucination that she was having, right? She's not watching grandfather fight in a war. So how does the wild and unforgiving setting of the countryside in chapter 13 force Maddie to step into the role of a leader? It's really just her and her grandfather. Why is she forced to lead them? But also, like, think about this, right? We've changed from a city setting to a wild, to a setting where it's very unforgiving, right? It's very hot. It's very unpredictable. There's all these things that are happening in this chapter, and she's forced to lead. Why, right? It's kind of a two-parter here to address. Read the historical quote at the beginning of chapter 15, and I just copied and pasted the quote for you. About Stephen Girard. That's how I think you say his name. If I'm wrong, I'm so sorry. How does the fictional character of Mrs. Flagg confirm what the history says about the changes made at Bush Hill? So we see early in the chapter, right, that it's known as a place that's very, very, very scary, very terrifying to Maddie. She doesn't want to end up there. But then when she does end up there, it's not the case. So he has come in and he has changed it, right? And so here, I think this is more the previous Bush Hill, and then how does that compare to the Bush Hill that Maddie sees? Then another last question, and I'm telling you guys, I found it. I found kind of. Bottom of page 45. I wasn't walking on a dirt road. I was slipping across the frozen river. The sun wasn't made of fire. It was a monstrous snowball. My teeth clattered together. I found this. Okay? But her question, Maddie says her teeth were chattering like castanets. First and foremost, I don't even know what a castanet is. I had to look it up. It's those little like clappy things that people dance with. I took pictures of them right here. So they clap together and they make these sounds. They chatter like almost like a clamshell essentially. Hope you all laughed at me doing this because I did. But I had no idea. So I found this picture for you guys to show you what a castanet is. So you kind of have an idea of why we're comparing it to this. But again, I didn't find it in chapter 13. If you find it in chapter 13, let me know. Okay, but regardless, Maddie says her teeth were chattering like castanets. Identify the type of figurative language that we're using, right? And then explain what is shown about her physical state. And that's really right here for you. This is explaining to you her physical state if you need help explaining it. But don't use this quote. Explain it in your own words. But man, I just wanted to find one piece of figurative language that's actually in the text. Now, when we get to this next section, I bolded the ones that I really want you to look at. I thought I bolded more than 2. Yeah, I bolded 3, so all L 1.8. In chapters 14 and 15, Maddie learns that Bush Hill is no longer the place of the dead she heard stories about. How does this develop a theme about prejudice or rumors versus reality during a crisis? I picked this one because we answered like 3 questions about it already, and we have a quote about it already, and all this stuff has already happened. Like I gave you the quote about it up here. So just... I liked this question, and I thought we answered a lot of them. And it's not that I don't like any of these questions right here. You're more than welcome to answer them. But I really like this imagery. Again, we talked about imagery earlier, so imagery's fresh in our brain. But like we talk about the hospital before and the hospital after. Again, I'm just going back to the hospital before. And again, you have a quote provided for you earlier from me. And then in chapter 15, Maddie observes the other patients. How does her first-person perspective make the reader feel more sympathy for the victims of the fever than a history book would? And I just liked how this really talks about the differences. I like the idea of answering this question because there is a very big difference between fiction and history textbooks. And that's why we look at both different things, right? Because the fiction is going to put us into the perspective of the characters of the people that were living during that time. Whereas the history books is just going to kind of like tell us the facts of the people at the time, right? I could tell you that a fever happened in 1793 in Philadelphia in a history textbook. I could tell you that, I pick a number of the people that died in Philadelphia and then we move on. Whereas a book like this will tell you what it was like to live during that fever, to have to survive out in the countryside, to be worried if your mother is going to die from her fever, all of these things. And then when we get here, down here at the bottom in chapter 14, 15, so on and so forth, this is, again, we're just practicing our context clues, right? So in chapter 14, Maddie's in a delirium based on her seeing things that aren't there, right? What does delirium mean? What could it mean? And so on and so forth. Like every single one of these gives you guys the context clues, right? The hospital is described as being orderly. Use the context of the nurses' schedules and the cleanliness of the room to define orderly, right? It's given for you, the context of each one of these. The point of this is practicing context clues and just how to do it. They're always going to give you stuff to help out. If you have any questions about what they're giving you, right? In chapter 15, the atmosphere at Bush Hill is efficient. Find an antonym for efficient that describes the way the city was handling the fever in the earlier chapters. Okay, inefficient, right? Why would I pick inefficient? Because in means not efficient. Oh, sorry, in means not and then efficient. You know what I'm saying? So anyways, sorry for this video running long, but it's not a required watching video by any means, because I am going to go over this on Tuesday or Wednesday, and B, you don't need me to go over this. It's just me trying to be helpful. I saw these clappers again. I just laughed. I've never heard of this term before. Maybe I have. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions, let me know. Hopefully a lot of us are getting started on this on Monday so that we can definitely get these turned in by Friday, Thursday or Friday. Oh, sorry, by Friday. All right. Bye, everybody.